Hi, El Paso guy. This is Dr. Alex Jimenez coming back with you. This is a very unique day, a very special day. We are offering some information to you guys as my patients. Today's a very unique moment in time. As you can see, my podcast is empty. As you're going to be able to notice in this particular area, you can actually see the podcast presentation is doing this alone. And as we're following the rules of engagement of today. Now, today is a moment in time where we're finding ourselves kind of a little bit on kind of a sandy ground. We're the flow and the situation of our present state is that we're all watching CNN. We're establishing things. But one of the concepts that we've been looking at in the last couple of weeks prior to this all happening was a disorder that we are all experiencing right now. And a lot of us are trying to figure out what we can do because we're all kind of feeling a little thick. We're feeling a little fat. We're feeling a little bit displaced from our normal patterns. So one of the aspects that we want to be able to do is to discuss what can we do with our physiology, things that we can do at home, things that we can adapt, and things that we can alter into our metabolic process. Now, as I've gone in the past, I've talked and discussed heavily on metabolic syndrome. Metabolic syndrome is one disorder that really affects us all, and we have given us options, and the options that we have done in terms of working with the sugar issues, the weight issues, the belly fat issues, as well as the underlying issues of the triglycerides that we've been discussing, along with cholesterol issues. We have looked at diets that have different varying components. One diet that is really, really popular is the fasting mimicking diet. I had an amazing experience when I went to Hollywood, Florida, about a good 2 years ago, where we actually did the Functional Medicine Institute program. We went out there. We saw the program presenting the fasting mimicking diet and teaching all of the new things that the diet is actually can do in the physiological state. But one of the things is when people hear fasting, it's kind of confusing. So I'm going to bring in an amazing individual, Victoria Hahn, who works with L-Nutra, and she is the medical science liaison for the fasting mimicking diet with L-Nutra. She's going to give us some information in terms of things that we can do and about the diet, because it's a very unique diet. And because we live on the border and we have a lot of, I guess, metabolic syndrome, just by definition, there are issues with high blood pressure, glucose, triglycerides, HDL issues. We want to take a look at the things that we can do. Now, one of the greatest things we've learned about metabolic syndrome is that it has an immediate response as to the diet. But not everyone can do a certain type of diet, whether it's intermittent fasting, a ketogenic diet, a different type of water fasting. We're going to go ahead and go over those things. So I'm going to present to you Victoria Hahn, who's really, really the person who's going to bring this home to us, and she's going to educate us on the process. So I'm going to bring her in right now, and we're going to go ahead and talk to her, and you're going to see me in the sideline in the far distance. So as I kind of click that button, Victoria, tell us, how are you doing? How's everything going with you?
Going well, staying safe, practicing physical distancing, doing everything I can to ensure that, I'm keeping myself safe as well as, everyone else that I interact with, including the hand washing. So very important. But doing good. How are you?
I'm doing very well. I wanted to present to my patients the fasting mimicking diet. I have a box right around here. I kind of actually took it away from. I have to go get it while we're talking here.
Yeah.
Actually, for the products. But I'd like for you to tell us a little bit about what the fasting mimicking diet is for the public to understand as to what the options are and what we're actually talking about when we say this unique fasting mimicking diet, because it's got a really good, unique name to it. So tell us a little bit about it. I know you got a presentation too, so I think you can share your screen and you can start talking about it. And let us understand a little bit about what fasting mimicking diet is for the public.
Yeah, so fasting mimicking diet. So before I get into the presentation, which here, let me just pop this bad boy open. So fasting mimicking diet is this concept that, in essence, maybe you don't actually have to be fasting, so omitting food entirely to be fasting, and so that's really what this diet brings. It brings the same type of physiologic and biological effect of fasting but with food. And so it's a really novel and kind of, bizarre type of nutrition program, because it takes you a little bit out of the box. You're thinking, how can you be fasting with food? And I'll go over in essence how you can, because there is a lot of science to explain how this works. And it unfortunately, it's not as black and white as we like to make it. But that's the beauty, is that you kind of can find these physiologic loopholes to being able to kind of stimulate a similar process without having to go through that absolute fasting process.
In terms of this is the presentation. So how? Okay, so this is the actual product here, and it looks like it's pretty simple. It all fits in a box.
Yeah, it absolutely. It's super straightforward. So, in essence, you actually get like a rather large box, and within that large box, you get the individual day boxes, and they're all evenly listed out for you. So it literally says day one all the way to day five. The product is actually a 5-day fasting mimicking diet, so you get everything that you need. So there's no, having to go to the grocery store, which is kind of convenient during this time, actually. But there's no having to go out and buying and figuring out like how much of this do I have to measure, or wait, what about this other ingredient, or did I get enough of these, plant-based products? None of that. It's already laid out for you, and that's really to not only aid in the ease of it, because again, it's a diet that mimics fasting, but also in the consistency of it, we really want to make sure that that's what it's doing. So we got to kind of treat it in this very almost clinical fashion.
I'd like to add that in the design of me presenting this, full disclosure, I've actually done the fasting mimicking diet 3 times. Each time,
Oh,
it's been an
wow.
experience for me, and the protocol does include 3 options, or 3 times that you can do it as the most optimal. As from if I'm correct, I'm not too sure if I'm correct, but I do know that 3 times is the times when we test it. So tell us a little bit about the product line. So I'll let you kind of take it from here. Go ahead.
Yeah, so here, let me just go straight into the presentation, and
Absolutely.
we'll start to, kind of weigh out some of these details. So the first question that, of course, typically is being asked is, what are your healthcare goals? So before we even start to step into Prolon and what fasting mimicking diets are, and even how fasting is beneficial, what are we all trying to achieve? And obviously, a lot of these that are listed right here. So body weight loss, body composition, even. I would argue that body comp is way more important than body weight. Body weight only tells you so much, but the amount of fat and muscle mass that you have is so much more important. Even the closet meter, I've definitely had times where I'm going into my closet, and some
Oh, I was
things
wondering
don't
what that
fit.
was.
Yeah, some things don't fit the way that they used to, and so that's always a little alarming. And I personally don't have a scale at home, and so that's really the way that I can determine whether or not I've been overindulging. So all of these things, I'd argue, are super pertinent. I mean, most of us have certain weight parameter goals, or metabolic balance goals, or even just wanting to feel better, like well-being goals. And so arguably, I know I've definitely said a few of these right here, like I'm struggling to, lose body fat, even when I'm working out, and when I'm trying to, figure out how I want to eat, even as, a dietitian. Some of these things are a little, they're hard to figure out. You have to just be constant trial and error, because unfortunately, for some of these issues, we still haven't necessarily figured out how to resolve them, which is why arguably obesity is such a huge issue that especially the United States and any of the westernized societies we're facing today. And so with any of those goals, we're obviously going to be talking about, how can we feel better about them. And so that really leads us to kind of a novel strategy, which is fasting. Now, of course, before we get into fasting, we want to define what it is. So, what is fasting? Now, arguably, whenever I ask this question, most people will remark like, "Oh, that's muscle mass loss," or "Oh, that's me starving," or "Oh, that's me feeling hungry," or I can't eat any food, or isn't that juice fasting? And to some extent, most of those would coincide with the common definition of fasting, which that would be to abstain from food or drink, and maybe that's for religious observation, for example, Ramadan fasting or Yom Kippur. But, that's just one way to think of fasting. You could actually think about it from the perspective of what's happening within your body when you start to fast. So I like to think of fasting from this common definition as the trigger for an outcome. And so the outcome is really what fasting is. And what that outcome is it's the lack of the triggering or the turning on, if you will, of what we call these food sensing pathways. It seems a little ambiguous, but truth be told, we've seen this in many different, mouse models as well as clinical trials, that there are literally these pathways that our bodies have that respond to food intake. And that makes sense. If you eat food, something has to happen, right?
Yes.
And we call these pathways these food sensing pathways. And so, in the absence of nutrients, or rather the right amount of protein, calories, carbohydrates, you can, to some extent, circumvent their activation. And so, that's really what fasting is. It's this biological process.
I like that
And
word, food
yeah,
sensing pathways.
yeah,
How did that come about? I just kind of just touch on that food sensing pathways. It just seems to me like a very understandable way of allowing people to understand that the body is sensing, almost feeling out
yeah.
the foods. So deep, go deep there.
Yeah, so no problem. So I honest to goodness, this is actually my favorite part about fasting is this molecular biology surrounding it, the physiology of it. It's honestly really beautiful. But I'm a little bit of, a nerd in that regard. But really what this is and how we came about it, one of the individuals who actually kind of piecemealed all of these individual components was Dr. Longo, and I'll get into some of what he's contributed to in regards to this whole area of fasting and longevity research. But really what these food sensing pathways are is they are literally these mechanisms that are triggered by certain levels of carbohydrates or sugars, or we actually call it glucose, but basically it's just a carbohydrate,
Yes.
or certain levels of proteins or amino acids, and also certain degrees of energy, so calories. All of these things can contribute to this overall biological process, that we think of as being fed. Because when you think about it, like when you eat food, well, what happens? Obviously, we know that something happens where we don't feel as sluggish, and we get some energy, and now we can go and do things throughout the day. And we know that that also helps out with weight gain if we
Yes.
eat too much. But
Yes.
like, what is that cellular process? What that biological process? That would be these food sensing pathways, to think about it simply.
Awesome. Let's keep on going. What are the what
Alrighty.
misconceptions?
Yeah, and so in terms of just some misconceptions, I highlight this one because I do get to see quite a few of these juice shops that kind of crop up, and they talk about juice fasting. And it's arguable because most of those juices are rather high in calories and even carbohydrates. And so when you think about biological fasting, it's really not that, because there's just too much nutrition in these shakes, which is great to some extent. Obviously, you want to get the vitamins, the minerals, and such, but not from the standpoint of actual fasting. It's not this. It's not one to one. So maybe it's fasting from the perspective of not eating solid food. So in that sense, it's fasting. But fasting is so much more than just kind of the composition of your food. It is the actual amounts that you're getting of each different type of nutrient. And so it's a little misconceiving, and there's a lot of these things that are cropping up because fasting is it's such a novel topic, and it's really popular. I mean, it's just so popular. It's gotten really popular within the last couple of years, which to kind of go a little forward in terms of how it got there, and I can show you some data, as far as how popular it is in the U.S. So part of the reason that's kind of gained a lot of traction is because although fasting has been around for a millennia, I mean, we had to evolve and adapt to these periods of basically food and not food. And so naturally, we know, our bodies know what to do when it has that type of environment. But what we've seen in clinical trials is that it's been shown to support metabolic health. It's also been shown to support this really interesting concept called cellular cleanup. We like to use the phrase autophagy. It's just a real fancy word to basically say the cells, so each of your cells, they have, their own micro environment, and they actually have their own kind of garbage disposal recycling center, which we could call autophagy. So it's a really interesting process that's triggered by fasting, and that actually can help to lead to cellular renewal. So if your cell is able to kind of take out these, less functional components and repurpose them for other types of, activities or endpoints, then as a whole, the cell can become more efficient. And so that's this concept of cellular renewal. And ultimately, what we see all these pieces contributing to is this promotion of longevity and health span. So this is how, in essence, fasting can be so beneficial. So to get into, how it's so popular, it's really no surprise that it's become really one of the number one dietary patterns in the United States. And in 2019, so this is in 2018, number one. In 2019, it just took second place to this concept called clean eating. And that's actually not a bad thing. Obviously, clean eating is one of the better things that we can be doing for ourselves. But the interesting thing to note about fasting is that, especially when you compare it to any of these diet patterns, so for example, vegetarian, vegan diet, low carb diet, gluten free diet, Mediterranean diet, all of these are compositional changes, meaning, for example, with low carb, you have to be very mindful about the amount of carbohydrates that you're getting, sometimes even the types of carbs. So aiming for a low glycemic index carbs, so ones that don't cause your blood sugar to spike too rapidly. So you have to be mindful about what you're eating. Whereas with intermittent fasting or just fasting as a whole, you actually don't need to consider that component. I mean, at L Nutrin for ProLon, we argue that you do, but for fasting as a whole, it's really, when and how you're eating is the consideration. You don't really have to modify what you're eating, and so that might be part of why it's been so, well received within, I suppose, just the community as a whole. Wouldn't you like to be able to continue to do what you're doing with just a slight alteration? It
Yes,
seems a lot easier than having to
absolutely.
completely shift your diet.
Simplicity has always been a component of trying to come together and making it
Yeah,
easy for people. If it's too hard, you can do a fasting, but as soon as you make that mistake of going elsewhere and they don't know what the rules of engagement are, it just goes crazy. This is so cool because it's all packaged in one kind of dynamic. So as I
yeah.
see that, tell us a little bit about the overall. When you say 36%, I noticed that you said 36% follow a specific eating pattern. What was
Hmm.
that number versus the 16% that I noticed there? Intermittent fasting was the top end that patients.
Yeah. Yeah, so in essence, really what they were trying to say, and this was from a larger study, but anyhow, what they were trying to really say is that people, they are following dietary patterns. It may not be, I suppose, too specific in regards to for certain reasons that wasn't well elucidated as to why they're following these dietary patterns. But it is to say that people are starting to follow specific ways of eating. So in essence, that's really this categorization of all of these different diets, and these are the ones that they were following. They wanted to see, how many people in the United States are doing fasting, how many are doing paleo, gluten free, all the way down to the DASH diet, dietary approaches to stopping hypertension, and the ketogenic or other high fat diets. They really want to catalog, in essence, what the U.S. is doing in regards to their own nutrition. So that's really where this number was coming
Got that.
from.
Makes perfect sense.
Yeah,
It-
yeah. And so, just to kind of continue on here, so we can go over different types of fasting because really, even in the previous slide that I was showing
mhm.
you, intermittent fasting, that doesn't really say a lot. It's even how they were categorizing the ketogenic diet slash high fat diets. It doesn't really say a lot. There's many iterations of, these really broad topics, but to hone in on the fasting and, different types of fastings. So I like to think of fasting as like the umbrella term, and then you can
Yes.
further refine that by way of duration of time. So in essence, fasting can be, longer. So we call that prolonged or periodic fasting, typically 2 or more days, or it can be shorter. And we call this intermittent fasting, and that's typically 2 or fewer days. I will argue that in the literature, when you're reading about intermittent fasting, you know, unfortunately, they'll kind of lump together all kinds of fasting within this
Absolutely.
umbrella.
Yes.
And it has to do with the fact it's a buzzword, and it's kind of what gets the clicks and
Hmm.
such. But unfortunately, with that being said, there's like a lot of misinformation, because unless you're really reading into what type of intermittent fasting pattern or fasting pattern they're really talking about, it just all kind of amalgamates together, and it's real confusing. Like, were they talking about time restricted eating, or were they talking about the 5-2 diet? It's kind of up in the air unless you're doing your due diligence. So that it's unfortunate, but for the sake of how we define fasting, this is really our main definitional structure. So to get into different types of intermittent fasting patterns, I'm sure everyone is super familiar with time restricted eating. So
Yes.
that would be like the 16/8. Yeah. Do you practice that at all?
As a matter of fact, I do. One of the things that I've always
Nice.
mentioned is that certain types of body types require certain
Hmm.
types of patterns, and I've looked at people's schedules, and ketogenic diet requires a real. It's almost like the advancedest version of process. It takes a certain hardcore individual to do it. So, you know, intermittent fasting allows people to kind of start really controlling that. We
Yeah.
start by just simple things of circadian, just eat during daylight, okay, and don't eat at night, versus then start bringing it down to 8 hours, and having 16 hours of just good non mechanism of eating. uh,
Hmm.
so I have done that, and the better they became, the intermittent fasting individuals and the patients that I have, I would actually go to the next level of go 6 hours. Now some patients can actually, I mean, my extreme athletes and the individuals who are just high performers, they can push it down to 3, but it takes a level of mental fortitude to be consistent in that. So I have
Yeah.
seen that ability to be certain types of people, for even different lifestyles. People who work at home can do more ketogenic diets, but in my particular practice, I physically work on people. Or if your job is physical, it's kind of hard to maintain that if you're expending calories throughout the day.
Absolutely.
So it depends on the individual. So we need something that is understandable, that it makes sense to the public, and to let them understand that they can really attain those high level of physiological and metabolic advancements, such as the apoptosis, the autophagy that actually occurs, and the reusing of the body with a simple mechanism. So I love this, and this is the kind of stuff I enjoy. So no, yes, I have tried. To answer your question, yes, I have done it in the past.
Nice, yeah, and arguably, at least what I've been seeing within just the consumer channels, time restricted eating has got to be like one of the number one forms of intermittent fasting right now, and it's because of that ease to some extent, because it's like a daily window of fasting where you don't have to be doing it for like a couple of days at a time or for days at a time. You're just doing it for like a day, and it's only a few hours within that day. And arguably, one of the most well researched ones would have to be the 16/8 and the 12/12. So more information is definitely coming out on this type of fasting pattern. It's all just in the works. So
Amazing.
that's one type of intermittent fasting pattern. There's also the 5-2 diet. This one was quite popular like 20, or sorry, not 20, 10 years ago. So 5 days of normal calorie intake, 2 days of fasting. Typically, those days are not one right after another, but sometimes they can be. Just depends on the individual. And then there's alternate day fasting, quite extreme, although there are some people who like to practice this. So, and this is basically where you're fasting for one day, and then the next day you're not fasting, regular calorie intake.
Mhm.
Then the next day you're fasting, and then you revert back to not fasting. You just keep doing that day after day. So that can obviously be quite a long-term commitment. So to shift our focus onto the opposite end of the spectrum, so the longer versions of fasting, there's not really many examples of this. There's water fasting, which very straightforward. Typically, this is done under the supervision of a medical provider, and you're kind of sequestered somewhere, like maybe a hospital setting or a
Like we
resort.
are right now. Like we're all
Exactly.
we're all
Yeah.
sequestered right now.
Yeah, seriously. And it's because, for some people, this can be actually quite risky, and I'll get into some of those risks. And just as a whole, it can be quite hard because typically this is fasting for days at a time. And then there's the fasting mimicking diet. So just going back to really, the main focal point, the FMD is a version of a prolonged fast. It's not a short-term fast. It's technically a longer fast because you're fasting for days at a time, as opposed to just a couple of days or a few hours. And this one, doesn't typically have to be in the hospital. Thankfully, the majority of people, they do this at home safely.
That's amazing.
Yeah, so to get into some of the ultimate effects of, intermittent fasting and just other fasting patterns, I really like this table because it tries to simplify a lot of this. So, and I put caloric restriction in here because, when you really start to look at the research for fasting, it looks like it actually is coming out of this, umbrella of dietary restriction and caloric restriction. So it deserves a space on this chart, although it is vastly different than fasting. So in terms of, caloric restriction, we do see that obviously this leads to weight loss. Sometimes though, especially because it's chronic and depending on how much caloric restriction you're implementing, some people, they can actually lose lean body mass. So you have to be really mindful and, careful about how you're implementing this type of pattern. We haven't necessarily observed the cellular rejuvenation effect. So it's going back to that renewal, that recycling. It's not well documented with caloric restriction. And of course, you do get food, and to some extent, it is, of course, safe. But shifting our focus on to the different types of fasting patterns, intermittent fasting, again, we get to see the weight loss. It's been variable in regards to lean body mass protection. Some studies have shown that lean body mass was impaired, but this may just be an artifact. It's not very well elucidated. This likely depends on the kind of fast that you're doing. Is
Hmm.
it the 5-2, ADF, TRE, time restricted eating? It's a little up in the air, but this one's been variable. Not necessarily an impact on the cellular rejuvenation. Again, very inconsistently reported, if at all. Sometimes you get food on this diet, sometimes you don't. Depends on the type of fast that you're doing, and typically it's quite a safe diet to do. But again, it depends on the iteration. The next type of fasting is periodic or prolonged fasting. And this one's really talking about water fasting in specificity. So obviously, we see weight loss with this, pretty dramatically so as well. Lean body mass can be sacrificed with this type of fasting pattern. So again, you really want to make sure that you're being medically supervised if you're doing a water fast for days at a time. It's a very careful balance, especially wherever you were at before you started into that. So don't try that one at home, please. But this is the only one that we actually get to see the cellular rejuvenation. So it appears that the sustained stress of fasting is really what's dictating this type of recycling and renewal capacity. Is fasting for a while actually. Obviously, with this type of fast, you don't get food, and the safety, like I was mentioning, it's very variable. Don't try that one at home.
Yeah, it's kind of
Um,
that's a okay.
so
Yeah,
that's
no.
where we can get
Hmm.
into fasting mimicking diet, which is a form of a prolonged fast, obviously, and you do get to see the weight loss very similarly to periodic fasting. Fortunately, and I'll show you some of this data, lean body mass protection, which is interesting, that may be a testament to the fact that there are nutrients in the diet. So you see this preservation effect. Still with the cellular rejuvenation impact. So thankfully, it is stressful enough fasting for days at a time. Again, that's really the mantra to triggering that. You do get food, and we do track its safety regularly. So it has been proven to at least be safe.
Guys, if I may, one of the things that I do is we make sure that we use biometric assessment exams, body mass indexes, BMIs, BMRs, BIAs are ways that we can assess muscle density or how much protein is in the body, how much muscle is about versus bone density. We got to be very careful that we do this in a very safe way. So in
Mm-hmm.
essence, as she alluded to, and she was very exact, we have to make sure that we don't lose muscle mass, and that's the beauty of this diet plan because it not only it has been shown to preserve muscle mass while you go through this process, and it also helps with cellular rejuvenation. It's almost like you're cleaning out your body. So, hate to use those examples, but we can go into the physiology of it. But this is a very attractive mechanism, and it's almost like a Tarzan effect. We go just to the point, and she's going to allude to that, to the point where the body starts shifting, and that's when the diet ends. So we go through these cycles. So in order to prevent muscle or actually muscle mass loss, it has to be timed at a certain point. So the beautiful thing that Dr. Longo,
Longo. Yeah,
Longo,
Longo.
he's a unique guy. I think he's from what country is he from?
He's from Italy,
Yeah, he's
actually.
got a unique accent. The dude's amazing. He's at the University of Southern Cal. Is that right? Is that where it's at?
Yeah, Southern
Where,
California.
yeah. So it's amazing that they have these. There's always people that go to California. The smart people do, and they come up with these great technologies that today we're seeing the effects. And I'm not going to sway too far, but we're actually seeing the genomics effects, or the genes are actually they're responding, and that's where you were talking about the food sensing system.
Hmm.
Our whole body is designed with the DNA that is just reacting to everything, whether it's a drug or food. So as it responds, this diet is in sync, dancing with it, and so to speak, I guess. Forgive me
Yeah.
if I'm wrong, but I'll let you go continue. But I'm very excited
No
about the
problem.
rejuvenation processes and also the lean muscle mass protection process.
Yeah, absolutely. And those are honestly like the most exciting pieces of fasting is that you if done in the right way, exactly as you're, kind of saying, if done in the right way, you can get benefits out of it without sacrifice. And that's part of, there's a whole concept called hormesis, and in essence it's this idea that, to one degree the same thing could be bad, but to another degree it could be beneficial. For
Hormesis.
example, fasting, it's a stress response, and it's similar to any other stress response, which obviously, especially in today's, environment, we don't want to be stressed out. We want to make sure that we're being healthy about that, but a little bit of stress can actually be good. And so it's fine tuning that, it's figuring out, well, what degree and to what duration.
Hmm.
That's really, the beauty of this concept is that a lot of work, a lot of time, like 20 years actually went into trying to figure out how this whole mechanism works, and then how to, in
If I
essence,
may touch on that
cultivate it.
word again,
Yeah.
hormesis. So from what I'm gathering, it's the extent and the timing of the duration. Is that what it is? To so like it's like from what I
Yeah.
gather, it is
Yeah.
it to the what was the word that you said, to the extent of it, or the amount of.
It's
Go ahead.
Yeah, it is to say, with hormesis, it's in essence, like in its simplest concept, and there's many different ways to look at it, but in essence, it's this idea that the degree or the
Degree. That's the
amount
word.
of something can be positive or in essence negative, or just have a different effect at different levels.
Makes
And
perfect sense.
so, for example, even with periodic fasting, with water fasting to a very, very high degree, obviously that can be very, detrimental, damaging, catabolic, just because it's starving
Hmm.
if you're fasting for too long. So you don't want to do that. You need to figure out, what's the degree of fasting that you need to get the benefits, because we know there are benefits to a certain extent, but then afterwards there probably isn't. And so that's part of this whole, concept of fasting mimicking diet, and why it's the 5 days and such. So
Makes perfect sense. Thank you.
yeah, no problem. So to get into some of those benefits in essence, and just to recapitulate, so a weight loss is a benefit of prolonged fasting, metabolic health, supporting that cellular cleaning, that ability to recycle, and also supporting the sense of well-being. We actually did a survey in 2019, and that was a very interesting finding, which I'll show you some of that, some of those notes, but all of these things, are some of the benefits of basically doing fasting, whether it be, water only fasting or any other type of prolonged fasting. But it does come with a subset of risks. Obviously, first things first, it's very difficult to adhere to. And I would argue that, even for myself and for any of the patients that I've ever had, to try to get them to do small behavior changes. So for example, hey, just try to incorporate
Hmm.
one vegetable per week. That can be quite difficult for some people to do, and it's a behavior change. At the end of the day, it's a behavior change. You have to modify something that you're doing, and especially when we're continuing to do something and we get stuck in a routine, it's hard to adjust. And not to kind of uh, integrate too much of what's happening in society right now. But we're kind of starting to see that with even how people are adjusting to today's society. It's a disruption of our routine, and it doesn't feel very nice, right? So
Hmm.
that's part of this notion of behavior change. And so if I were to tell somebody, hey, I want you to water fast for 4 or 5 days at a time, that's me taking out everything. I'm just completely abruptly altering their lifestyle, and that could be nearly impossible for some people. So it's no surprise that water fasting is just very difficult to do. But at the same time, as we were going over, it could also be at the risk of lean body mass. So let's say you get to the point of wanting to do it, you have someone to supervise you.
Hmm.
There's still an inherent risk, depending on how long you're doing the water fasting. There's always a potential to lose lean body mass, and obviously it's malnutrition. That is what water fasting is as a whole. The lack of nutrients, when you're only consuming water, at least macro and micronutrients. Water is obviously another type of nutrient, but it's this deprivation of them. And so it can be very dangerous from that perspective, especially given wherever you're starting out with. Going into that, you could already be insufficient, so
Wow.
be further exacerbated. And then, interestingly, there is this gallstone risk. Dr. Longo does talk a lot about this one, and there's some studies to show that certain periods of fasting, there's almost like a period where it's not so risky, and then it gets to a point where it becomes more risky. So there are a lot of these things that we have to consider with water fasting if one is to try to even do it on our own. And then also considering that it may not be appropriate for everybody and for more than just these reasons listed.
Makes sense.
And so, that's part of the reason why Dr. Longo had developed this fasting mimicking diet. Truth be told, part of the reason was just and this is a picture of him right here. This is Valter Longo, Dr. Longo. And yes, he is at USC, and he's the director of the Longevity Institute there. And in essence, originally a lot of his research was on stress response and longevity and antioxidative capabilities, as well as water fasting. And it's one thing to water fast yeast or mice. It's a completely different ball game to water fast people. It doesn't work out as easily for obvious reason. And
Yeah.
so that's part of the reason why he actually had to figure out a way to still be able to study this really interesting process that he was able to combine and bridge together. He was able to see that these food sensing pathways, they're so intimately tied to this aging process. And if you were to elevate them too high, you can see that they accelerate aging in essence. So the idea is maybe we can try to modify or modulate or adjust this type of aging process by adjusting these food sensing pathways. And so that's part of this pinnacle research that he was trying to figure out. But when you get to the point of studying this with people, they don't want to water fast, and so that really forced him to figure out an alternative to water fasting. And that's really the birthing of the fasting mimicking diet. It's out of absolute necessity in
Yes.
terms of wanting to study it. And as a researcher, obviously if you spend so much time on something, you really want to see it through, and especially if you think it's going to be beneficial. So you have to adapt and adjust, and that's what he did.
It's one of those things when we're looking, as I alluded to initially, we're sitting at home, we're trying to figure out with the dynamics of the present day, what we can do for ourselves and how we can kind of benefit from this period of time of pause. We're all in queue, so this is a great way of looking at changing our metabolism and making it work. Going back to that first moment when I first understood this or was made aware of the fasting mimicking diet, I was surrounded by the top functional medicine doctors in the country. Um, you know, Land. I think
Mm-hmm.
there's Jerry Bland. Who's the other one?
Oh, there's so many
There's a
individuals.
bunch of guys that actually put this thing together, and functional medicine, but the onslaught of all the specialists around the world that came to try to figure out and understand what this new science had been that had been just dropped down at the Functional Medicine Institute seminars. We were all very aware as to what it was, and you could see that the thriving doctors around the world, from all over the world, were trying to figure out how can we incorporate this for patients. So I feel blessed to have you here again. So just to mention that again, and to continue with your story, because I just want my patients to know that this is a blessing to have you guys for the people of El Paso.
Yeah, no problem. I'm really excited to be here. I'm excited to being able to share some of this information. So yeah, let's just kind of keep on going. So in terms of the fasting mimicking diet, it's really just such an interesting and novel product as a whole, and so it really ticks off some of these really important elements of a breakthrough product. So it is all plant based. That's something kind of interesting to note, because even when some people go through it, you're thinking like, oh no, like I can't do just plants. Like I always eat meat. I love my meat. You would be surprised. You can do that for 5 days, absolutely. And that's I'll go over the kind of emotional effects that happen with FMD and ProLon. But it's interesting that, yeah, everybody, you actually could be eating just a plant-based diet, and this is just one way to do so. And again, it's only 5 days, so it's not a full-time commitment. But part of what built this was NIH and university-based research and development. Again, 20 years plus of research went into this type of concept, and just a lot of grant funding, honest to goodness, and foundational research. So preclinical, we had to test it out on different animal models first, and then we started going into clinical trials to show its safety in humans, in essence. And of course, this technology has been patented, and it is very innovative, and so that really lends well to why we wanted to go forward with that patent. And a lot of the research, if you were to ever want to look into it, it's actually published in some of these top tier medical journals. So maybe you're not familiar with some of these, but these are the journals that we use in, as clinicians, to find evidence-based information. So it really does speak volumes that any of these publishers, they were like, hey, this does sound really good. Like let's publish this. Let's get it out there. It's huge to have this happen. So it really adds to that validity of this concept, which is nice, of course.
It is. Yes.
Oh, and so then to kind of get into like the biological effects of FMD, and this is like a real simplified version of what happens, but for the most part, it kind of meets all of these little parameters. This does happen. It's just sometimes we like to simplify. So on day one, I like to call this the equalizer, and it's because everybody gets the same day one. It's around 1100 calories for that day. And it's really there to, equalize and wash you out from whatever you were doing before Prolon into ProLon. So basically, this is, that transition day. So some people, by the end of it, you'll start to really ramp up this fasting state. By day two, this is the fasting state. Now you're fasting. The caloric ranges, they do drop down by days 2 to 5, and they have like a weight dependent factor. So you'll get a little bit of a different caloric amount depending on your weight. But in essence, the calories are anywhere from 700 to 800 calories. And so by day two, we really like to view this as that fat burning day, because your body is adapting to fasting. Now it has to, utilize different types of substrates in order to fuel itself. So it's going to start to in essence, fat burn. By day three, you really would have ramped up a process called ketosis. Most people, or many, can actually reach this state on day three, but it's contingent on the individual. Everybody has a different, metabolic rate. Everybody has a different body composition. So not everybody will reach it on this day, but we do observe that many do. And that's really like an accelerated state of fat burning, in essence. And you can perpetuate ketosis by way of fasting, or by way of the ketogenic diet, they are a little different. So they're not really, they don't get there the same way, but the outcome is relatively similar, at least in regards to kind of ramping up this fat burning process. But day three is also where we like to consider that autophagy is really starting to kickstart. So that recycling mechanism. This can also
Yes.
happen on day two as well, but day three is like really where it's kind of taking that full fledged, running the course. By day four, more of the cellular recycling, again, sustaining that fat burning, that ketogenic state. And by now, more of the cellular renewal. So enough of that recycling has occurred. Now it's really optimizing. And by day five, again, the sustained effect of the fat burning, the ketosis, recycling, and renewal. And so that really lends us really well into day six, which is where you kind of kick yourself out of the fast. And it's important to note this because, interestingly enough, what I get to hear from some users is that, you know, even if before they started the program, they're thinking, oh, this is going to be a little too hard. Why not? I'm going to do it. My healthcare provider is telling me that I should do this for myself. So they go through it. And then by day five, they'll call us up and they'll say, hey, I feel really good right now. Can I do another fast after this? Like, can I do two in a row? How do I extend this
Hmm.
period? Can I just do some water fasting afterwards for like a couple more days? What do I do? And obviously the answer is no. We don't want you to do water fasting or doing two, back to back FMDs. That's not the point of it. But it is really rewarding to hear that because it's this echoing of, people are actually starting to feel, quite nice. And the point of why we want to kick people out of the fast after day five is because part of the fast is this cleanup. It's this, fat burning phase. But in order to capitalize on all of that cleanup, on all of this kind of new foundation that's been laid out, you do have to refeed. So you have to start, reintroducing nutrients. You do have to replete yourself afterwards. And that's really this balancing act between fasting and feasting. Both are important. So going back to those food sensing pathways, it's one thing to kind of trying to downplay them or turn them off, but we don't want them off forever. We do need to turn them back on. It's just this modulation of it. It's kind of this playing around with it, turning it on, turning it off, turning it on, turning it off. That flexibility, that's what's part of providing some of these benefits. So it's not just kind of always turning it off. That would not be a good thing at all. And so fasting, its concept, although it's simple, it's complex in the sense that there's so many different things that we have to be considering with it. And that's going back to that idea of, it depends on how much you're getting in, you're going to get a different effect. So obviously, we don't want to be fasting forever. That'd be a really damaging effect. But fasting for the right amount of time,
Victoria, I got a question for you. In terms of
yeah.
looking at that particular graph model,
Mm-hmm.
one thing I noticed is that I've done this a few times now, and the dynamics. I like your drawing there, and I'll go right back to it
Yeah.
because that diagram, it's kind of like it shows an up and a down. Um, Talk to me a little bit about the emotions that people experience in general in terms of each kind of day as they go through this, because one of the great things about
Yeah.
this diet is that it's structured. I have a philosophy
Mm-hmm.
that which has the greatest order always rules. There's a great order in the structure of the design of this. And one of the things that I see is that in that moment your mind starts going and your body starts changing and the dynamics that actually is occurring. One of the great things to hold on to is a structured mechanism that actually you can follow it and just continue with the path. But talk to me a
Yeah.
little bit about the emotional as well as what do people experience on the days that go by, because that's kind of a unique thing. And by the way, I will say that my first time doing it, I experienced the unknown. I didn't know how I was going to respond. The second time I was
Yeah.
ready. I was almost like I was ready to go for it. And then the third time I was even, it was a surprise that I was experiencing different emotions, though similar, but a different level of emotional experience and mindset that changed throughout the days. Tell me a little bit about what you've noticed with the patients throughout the United States that take this diet.
Yeah, so in terms of actual survey data, unfortunately, we don't have a lot on the feelings during prolon. We do have on afterwards, which is quite
Okay.
interesting. But to get into more of like an anecdote, so typically things that I get to hear, or
Yes.
collectively what we've discussed as a group, all of the team members that I have, something that's pretty common, I would argue. Again, everybody does experience this a little differently, and that's not really like a straightforward response. And I understand, like it is kind of the
It's fair
unknown,
though.
but it's true. Some people, they go through this and they're like, oh, this was such a breeze, like I
Hmm.
didn't even feel like I was fasting. And then others are like, wow, I've just never fasted before, and now I fasted. So they're kind of awestruck by that experience. But arguably, days one, most people don't really have any true remarks on this day. Some people, they'll remark that, oh wow, it was a little bit less of what I normally eat, but it has so many calories in it, and also the way that we've structured out the actual day one, you get around almost like four technical meals that day. You get two these large, like high healthy fat bars, and then also like nut based fats, as in and then also we have like two soups and a variety of snacks. So you get a lot of food in, and if you divvy it up right, you'll notice that it does sustain you quite well.
Hmm.
But by day two, three, arguably these are the days that most people, they may remark like, I feel kind of sluggish. I don't feel myself. I'm not feeling as they're questioning why they're feeling kind
Hmm.
of off, if you will. And it's not specific. It's not like, oh, I have this type of I don't know, pain, or I have this type of feeling. It's just kind of like, I just feel a little not myself today. And usually we like to kind of liken that to this transition. So you going from kind of carb burning to this fat burning state. So that's like that adaptation. We're not too sure if that's what's really happening, but it can be argued that some people, at least if you've never gone through a fast before, you may end up feeling kind of some of these like, oh, I feel a little off days two, three. But usually by day four or five, and especially on day five, actually, these are the days that typically people feel kind of the most revitalized, if you will. So they have the most
Hmm.
energy on these days.
Yes, I
They
did.
tend to rebound, so they don't feel that same kind of like, oh, I feel off. They're like, wow, I have so much energy right now. Like, and I get a lot of phone calls where people, they feel like they shouldn't have that much energy. They're actually a little worried, like, oh, I woke up early today and I got a lot done, and is this normal? And it's funny because to some extent it is. That's part of that adaptation. At least that's how we're kind of picturing it. Um, so
Victoria, I'll
you
tell you some.
transitioning.
When
Yeah.
you mention that, one of the beautiful things is that we have a social network. When
Hmm.
I've done this with a group of people, I found it to be very, very cathartic to communicate, to take pictures of us while we're with the
Yeah.
packages and share it. So we weren't. I didn't feel like I was alone. I felt like I was in a community doing this together.
Oh yeah.
So yes, when I recommend people do this as husband and wife, or families that are large, they can try it together because it does really really bring you together because you're doing something for yourselves at the same time. So I got to tell you, from my own experience, I felt the need to communicate, and it really served me well to be able to have that ability to communicate through social medias. So yeah, it's an awesome thing.
Yeah. Yeah, no, and I definitely would agree that, like, if anybody is thinking about doing the fast, definitely work together with others. It's funny because the types of questions that arise, you'll find that maybe you'll have the same questions, maybe you'll have completely
Hmm.
different questions, and you actually develop these inside jokes. Like, I know, I know for myself, with a few others in the office, whenever I'm doing the fast, there's like a little olive packet. Oh my gosh, the olives are so delicious, and
Oh
maybe I'm just
yeah.
a little biased. They're green olives and they're pitted, thankfully. But anyhow, it's funny because you get like this little packet of them, and there's a little like olive oil inside the package. And once you're done eating them all, like we are just kind of like taking out all the liquid, like, oh my goodness, savoring every last drop, literally.
Yes, yes, yes.
And
Those
that
olives are
becomes its
very
own
good.
inside joke. Yeah, so it's funny. You can build a sense of camaraderie with this. So
You do.
yeah, I
Yes,
definitely
yes.
encourage
It is. It
making
is.
sure that you're with others when you're doing it, in terms of socializing with them. So other things that we see with the fasting mimicking diet, and this is specific to FMD, we did run a clinical trial. So there were researchers, Wei et al. In 2017. They ran a clinical trial, and 71 individuals had completed this trial. And in essence, they wanted to see the effects of one round of fasting mimicking diet, so the 5-day FMD, done once a month for 3 consecutive months. And so after, what they had remarked was that, individuals, they lost on average 5.7 pounds BMI, so body mass index, that dropped by zero point 0.9 points. And so that's that ratio of,
Mm.
in essence, body weight to height. Trunk fat went down. So compositionally wise, what kind of weight did people lose? It appeared to be this trunk fat, and lean body mass was thankfully preserved. We did not observe any lean body mass loss. So a lot of these, really healthy weight loss type benefits with the fast. And again, this was, the 5-day FMD done once a month for 3 consecutive. And so, other benefits that we see, of course, this promotion of cellular cleanup, reduction of body weight and body fat, and then interestingly, this maintenance in the level of IGF-1, which I didn't really go over too much, and I won't spend too much time on this bad boy because it gets relatively complex. But IGF-1, it's called insulin-like growth factor 1, and it's actually been implicated in this aging process and disease, and that's part of this is one of the kind of food sensing pathways. So this one is really important, and one of the ones that Dr. Longo had really just done a lot of research with, trying to figure out, what's triggering it and how can you modify it, at least with fasting. So these are all outcomes that we see with the FMD.
It is a bad boy. It is the one that we focus on when we talk about metabolic syndrome, and it goes real deep, and it does make a difference on that bad boy called insulin. So it's a good one. So I definitely will allude to that in a future podcast because it's very important that even though it looks kind of a menacing and it's a deep word, but I just love the fact that the research was done with that as the basis.
Yeah, and yeah, you could definitely spend like a long time on this one. Its whole mechanism is a really beautiful thing. But yeah, it's interesting to see that again, like this kind of short-term intervention, we see some of these outcomes. So to kind of go over some of these outcomes in like one, two, three, four format.
Hmm.
So one of them, of course, rejuvenation, wellness, and health optimization. This program was really designed to promote health span, which health span is this concept of healthier years lived. So it's one thing to live longer, that's fine, but what if, those years where you were in very poor health during that time? That wouldn't be too fun, right?
Mm-mm.
Maybe then you'd kind of reevaluate that concept of live fast, die young. So it's so much less about that. It's more about healthier years lived. So, making sure that there's quality with that quantity is so important.
Victoria, that's a huge point there because touching on that one delicately, the
Yeah.
the issue is when I talk to my patients, I tell them, "Man, I want you to live 100 years." That's what I say. I say to that to them, "We got to do it," because when we look at the turn of the century, people didn't live far beyond 50s. Today, we live much longer. In the mid 60s, it was 65. Today, we're reaching even to up to 100. Many of us have parents that are in their 90s and close to their hundreds. And one of the biggest concerns that people have is, I don't want to live that long. I don't want to feel ugly that or bad.
Mm,
And that's exactly what
yeah.
you're alluding to, the quality of life that you're feeling in that process. So yeah, it makes sense.
Yeah, absolutely. And it's a kind of, it's not a novel concept, but I feel like more recently it's definitely gaining some traction. So
Mm-mm,
I'm glad
absolutely.
to. But anyhow, so to go a little more further into some of these research results, there was this kind of weight management effect. So fast way to lose weight, specifically coming from the circumferential region, so that trunk fat, abdominal fat, without any of that lean body mass loss. And again, this was really only with 5 days. So, think of short-term interventions with 5 days done once a month for 3 consecutive. And going back to what you were saying a little earlier, that's where we get this concept of the once a month for 3 consecutive months. It's totally based on our clinical trial. Ultimately, in terms of how many times you may want to do the fasting mimicking diet, that's definitely a discussion for you and your healthcare provider, and also just, what your healthcare goals are as a whole. So it may not be appropriate for everybody to do the once a month for 3 consecutive, but for some, it may. And just to note, these effects did actually persist even when individuals went right back to their normal diet. So we had some follow-up evaluation after those 3 consecutive cycles. There was like in essence around like 3 to 4 months after those last 3 cycles, and during that time, the researchers had told those individuals MD protocol. There wasn't, hey, follow a healthy diet, Mediterranean, exercise more. There wasn't any of that instruction, and we still did see this persisting in these weight loss effects. So that was actually quite interesting. And of course, in addition to some of the other markers that we had measured, we actually saw that this had helped to maintain healthy levels of not only IGF-1, so kind of going back to the insulin-like growth factor 1, super important, but also systolic blood pressure, interestingly enough. And then to get into some of those well-being aspects that I was mentioning a little earlier, so this was based off of that survey that we had conducted in 2019. And what we had kind of summarized from this survey was that these participants, they reported just a multitude of these well-being aspects. So an improvement in their energy levels, and this would be after the fasting mimicking diet. They also felt more empowered to make
Mm.
healthier, changes in their life, and they felt like they had a positive impact on their lifestyle after the FMD. So it's interesting to note that there is this kind of emotional or wellness aspect or impact to completing in essence ProLon. Just 5 days can really set the tone for so many other things to come. And although we didn't measure this in the clinical trial, we took it upon ourselves to try to evaluate this on the L-Nutra side, and we did get to see a lot of these really interesting empowerment outcomes afterwards.
That is amazing.
Yeah. And so then to kind of summarize, and this is, in essence, my last slide before I have the Q&A. So to summarize the benefits of the FMD, and this is again, off of the once a month for 3 consecutive, so 5 days on, 25 off, 2 more times in a row. We did see the maintenance of healthy levels of IGF-1, systolic blood pressure. We also saw that lean body mass was maintained at a healthy level. And of course, we saw this reduction in weight and abdominal fat.
That's amazing. This is it
And
right
so
here, huh?
yeah, that is it. So, any questions?
Well, yeah.
Thank you
The
so much for allowing me
the
to go through
question
all
that I'm
that.
getting here from some of my people here on the feed is that they love the presentation, and actually,
Thank you.
there's 3 nurses there that say that they're doing it. They've done it in the past, and they loved it too. Um,
Wow.
so let me ask you this: there's a person here that says
Yeah.
he's 300 pounds and he's about 5'7".
Hmm.
Can he do it? He's clinically, I guess, from the dimension there, I think, clinically obese, and
Yeah.
that issue there, he's concerned that it may be something that he can look at and he can try. What could we say to him?
Yeah, so what we can say to him is, in essence, it definitely this program, one of the intentions of it is weight loss. But given that we know that obviously with a very elevated, or a relatively elevated BMI, you may want to discuss it with your healthcare provider to determine if Prolon would be right for you, and then in addition, what that frequency would look like. So I think the next step would really just be having that conversation, opening it up, and it's a pretty easy, straightforward conversation to have because ultimately, what Prolon is it's just a 5 day, fasting mimicking diet. But arguably, you could probably also say it's a 5 day, reduced calorie program, and typically, the healthcare provider will have a few questions about that. But it's a pretty straightforward kind of conversation to
Victoria,
have,
I
and
would add
yeah.
to that for an individual that has that presentation, clearly talk to your doctor first. Find out
Yeah.
metabolically how you stand, if you have any underlying issues. In today's environment,
Hmm.
before we go on and do anything that is unique, and then you are having some maybe underlying issues, kidneys, heart issues, always get their doctor to approve these processes
Yeah.
because you want someone to evaluate that. And that makes sense. The other question I have here, Victoria, that I noticed here was people are asking, where can they get it? Where can they order it? And is this something that they can get online? Do they have to go to a doctor? What typically are most people doing?
So, I don't know if you yourself
I
have
do,
your
I do,
own
I do. Yeah, we
channel.
have our channel.
Yeah, so in case you are a patient of Dr. Jimenez, then definitely discuss this with him, determine if it's a good fit for you. You might want to go through his channel in essence. But we do also have a website, and I would argue that most individuals who are just kind of looking to incorporate fasting into their life, yeah, typically they'll just kind of purchase it on their own through the patient portal that we have online. But
Absolutely.
for some of the individuals that, yeah, you may have some questions about it, is this right for me? Then it's always going to be more appropriate for you to have that discussion, open up that discussion with your healthcare provider.
What we do in our office is we do a full functional medicine assessment, functional wellness assessment. We go through deep and we figure out where the physiology is. We do at least a
Yeah,
wellness panel to determine what's going on, and we evaluate the BMI, BIAs consistently and
yeah,
every few weeks. So it's important to if you're going to be scientific about the process, to have and if you have underlying issues, you want to make sure that you have a watchful eye by your specialist, your doctor, your family
absolutely.
physician. So that makes perfect sense. Um, well, Victoria, I got to tell you, this has been a blessing on our behalf of El Paso, and I want to at least
Yeah.
thank you. I want to thank the group over there at El Nutra and ProLon, the design. The product is one that we need. Having an environment where metabolic syndrome does affect so many, we want to be able to do certain things to control our diets. When I first came to El Paso, the story was we were the fattest, sweatiest town of the United States. And sadly,
Oh,
today that was what was known. But today I mean, not sadly, the awesome component of it is that today there are fitness centers everywhere. In 1990, when I came out here, there were no fitness centers. People are very health conscious. My patient base is extremely educated. The internet has evolved. People are learning, and people really understand the sciences of biomedicine, biometrics designs, and assessing the body for what it is. The question many times, because there's so much information, is, well, where do I start? How do I do this? This
mhm.
is a awesome it's an awesome mechanism and a plan to follow where it's had scientific backing, a fundamental approach that is just, second to none. I love the research. I read it consistently. I have their books. I have books to offer my patients if they ever want it, because I do have people that want to learn of the breadth and width of the science behind the evolution of this particular diet. So I'm very much excited to bring this to the community. So I want to thank you, Victoria, and I want to thank your group and organization to have allowed at least this presentation to go live on the social portals, so that we can bring a different option for our patients. And I want to honestly thank you very much, because for me it's been a blessing to hear of the areas. Let me see if I can get you in there somehow. But well, you're there. I'll put you in the middle there. And what we can do is in the future, if you guys have questions, call me and we can discuss these things. And is there anything else that you would want them to know, Victoria, in terms of this
Yeah.
protocol?
So just a brief, tidbit, and not to downplay anything, but just to note, and I really want to make sure this is clear that, of course, FMD is really exciting and it's novel, but just to note, it has not been evaluated by by the FDA to treat, diagnose, cure, prevent any conditions. So it's not meant for a therapeutic rationale. Rather, if you have maybe these weight loss goals, or healthy aging support goals, or metabolic balance goals, that's definitely something that ProLon can fit in. But just to always be very mindful that it's not intended for treatment and has not been evaluated for those types of implementations. So
Victoria,
just to kind of
well said,
clarify.
Victoria. I totally got that, and it makes perfect sense. And I really appreciate you going out of your way to show us this process and to give us the parameters. I thank you very much. So.